right, thank you guys so much. We have another Kill Rationalism video today. Today we're going to be exploring, perhaps not in its full entirety, rationalism and art. And in doing so, we are going to be responding to EFAP. Now, who is EFAP? EFAP is a group of YouTubers, streamers, who, generally speaking, analyze and discuss art, and they do these over these long streams. Normally, they respond to people who make content about art, usually pop culture stuff, so Star Wars, Ghostbusters, Terminator, Jurassic Park, that kind of stuff. And they offer their opinions, and they critique those of the people that they're watching. Now, EFAP is a group consisted of, I think, 3 or 4 people. So one of them is Mauler. I think it's Mauler. The other is a guy named, what's his name? Rags, I believe it is. And then we have Fringy, I believe it is. I do watch these guys. I actually like these guys, which will be my next point. But I hope it doesn't come off as me being... I'm genuinely trying to remember their names. And then I believe sometimes they have guests, right? They had that critical drinker guy. He's a pretty popular guy. He's on there a lot. It's that sort of side of YouTube. They try not to be explicitly political, but unfortunately, because art has been, politics has been shoved into so many so many pieces of art and so many mediums and, and all this stuff, that there is a sort of political bend in there, if only as a product of you kind of have to respond to it. So they kind of take the anti-woke side of things, which generally I agree with. It's very frustrating. But today, we are going to be talking about, kind of like I said in the beginning, rationalism, rationality, and art. And we're going to be responding to some of their main ideas. So first and foremost, I actually like these guys. They seem like pretty cool guys. I don't agree with everything they say. We watch similar movies, but also different movies. I would love to hear them talk about something that's a little... something maybe that's a little more slightly obscure, at least, so they can bring it to their large audience. Something like, I don't know, anything, really. It could be anything. Like, I'd love to hear what they thought about, like, Midnight Cowboy or maybe Wild Strawberries. That could be cool. I'm not saying you can't do the pop culture stuff. I think pop culture is awesome. I really don't care when it comes to movies, whether it's low budget or big budget. I always say if it's good, it's good, right? Sometimes you want... Synecdoche, New York. Sometimes you want Mad Max Fury Road. That's why I have both in my collection. So this critique has nothing to do with them being Philistines for liking just pop culture. It's got nothing to do with that. We're just going to be trying to deconstruct their very causal, mechanical, and what I would argue shallow taking to art. I think it's a very shallow, rationalist understanding of art, and I think they could do better. So, first and foremost, let's get into some of their main ideas. So, first up, we have objective or subjective. This video is going to be a little more relaxed, a little more informal. I have notes here, but I'm also going to kind of freestyle a little too, so if I don't sound quite as eloquent, that's why. Also, that's another thing. Because these guys respond to videos, just kind of screen share and then respond and, pause and make that's what EFAP stands for, by the way. Every frame will pause, because they pause so frequently that they've kind of grown a reputation for it. It is technically possible that they could find this and respond to it. I think it's very, very, very unlikely, because I'm such a small channel and who cares what I think. But it is possible. So the reason why I'm going to be getting slightly repetitive in this video, I want to just warn you guys up front. So I'm going to give you a heads up. So if you guys want to skip 2-3 minutes, that's fine. But we're going to get slightly repetitive in this video, because if they do respond to this, which again is unlikely, one, they're not going to watch my other Kill Rationalism videos. They don't know what quantum logic is, which we're going to be getting into. So I'm going to be a little repetitive with quantum logic, a little repetitive with numinous experiences. Unfortunately, it just is what it is. I'm going to try to speed through it. That's number one. Number two, they're rationalists. Okay, so as former rationalists yourselves, most likely, you know better than anyone that when the walls are coming down, no stone must be left unturned, right? Because if you leave a stone unturned or overturned or whatever, they will latch on. I'm terrible with that phrase. I think I should have chose a different phrase. I'm a moron. You must leave no stone unturned, because if you don't, they'll latch on that last stone and say, look, everything's fine. That's just how rationalists are. It makes sense from the perspective of someone who's having their entire walls broken down, so nothing personal. Okay, so let's get right into it. So we have objective versus subjective. The EFAP crew believes art is both objective and subjective. Not only do they believe it's both objective and subjective, but they have seemingly, even if they won't I feel like if you ask them point blank, they would just verbally concede, yeah, we value the objective more than the subjective. But I guess we'll get there. So, of course, these two are separate from each other. And, of course, this separation means there is space between the two. So, obviously, we can see, if you followed my Kill Rationalism series, the very clear way that rationality brings objects in the world into relation with each other. It posits one thing that's quantifiably measurable and known against another, in a dualistic antithetical sense, meaning one negates the other and vice versa. And then we invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to either privilege one of the two or form a synthesis. Now, of course, with this antithetical, there is space between. Everything is about space, objectified space, perspectivity. That's rationality. So we can see the space here, and then we invoke the third act to reconcile. It seems, and if they were to verbally deny this, I would call them liars, or maybe not liars, maybe that's a bit far, but I would say that they're not being quite, I would accuse them of being disingenuous. It seems that they have privilege objective over subjective. We'll get into later why, but for now we're going to stick with objectivity. So the problem with this objectivity, apparently inherent in a film script, say, is that rationality will be the mode of thought to confer this objectivity. That's a big, big, big problem. Why? Because all logic relies on quantum logic. Traditional rationality relies upon irrational assumptions. So that's going to be a big problem. Now, I apologize for being repetitive. I actually am going to stick with my old example because I'm used to it. So for the EFAP boys or any rationalists in art, unfortunately, it is not even true that, well, we'll get there. So let's say I'm up on the second floor of my house. It's night. I'm writing something. Maybe I'm writing the notes for this video, and I hear something in the basement. Immediately, I know it is a dryer. It is a dryer. It is not a hunk of metal. It is not just a heat source. It is not an extension of the floor. It is not an extension of the wall. It is not something I can rest upon. It is a dryer. It shows up as a particular thing with all its functions, all its essences, all its goals, kind of like this laptop. It's not just a random hunk of metal that emanates noise every once in a while. It is a laptop. It presupposes certain functions, certain standards, certain goals, certain purposes. It is a laptop. It is a dryer, right? But the problem is, in theory, the dryer, in this case, be a hunk of metal. It could be a heat source. It could be a symbol for modernity, or a symbol for technological advancement, or a symbol for whatever. It could be all of those things. But what happened was, we'll say non-consciously or automatically, in accordance with the rapidity found in quantum mechanics, what happened was my consciousness imposed a series of rapid either-or questions that pit one against the other and then privilege one, kind of like we discussed about 2 or 3 minutes ago. So is this object, we'll say, a dryer or is it heat source? Okay, well, we'll say dryer. Is the object a dryer or an extension of the wall? Dryer, we privilege a dryer. Is the object a dryer or a symbol of technological advancement in modernity? Dryer, right? So then we have the dryer. Are you seeing the problem here with your objectivity? So my question to the EFAP guys is, I view the dryer as a symbol for the technological advancement of modernity. My question is to you, which one is objectively true? Is it the dryer or is it the symbol? Problem is, it's both. And if you want to say, okay, well, if it's both, you've just completely transcended the laws of logic, my friend. A can only equal A and not A and B at the same time. A equals A. That's the law of identity. A cannot be A and B at the same time. That's the law of non-contradiction. It's either A or B, the law of the excluded middle. You have just transcended 3 very basic laws of logic, okay? Because it's not just a dryer. It is a dryer and a symbol and a heat source and an extension of the wall and an extension of the floor. So what happens is this object, to be clear, I just want to make this very clear. I'm not denying the existence of the object itself. Like, take my mouse right here. It could be a symbol or it could be a computer mouse. Which one is it? The point is the physical entity exists. I'm not a skeptic. I'm not a postmodernist. That's not what this is. I'm just saying it is not objectively a mouse because it could be a symbol or it could be a weapon. If someone bursts in the house and I just want to think quick. It could be all of these things. So really, in the case of the computer mouse and in the case of the dryer, its ontological validity belongs to a a field of ontological simultaneity in which the object in question is both a dryer, like I said, a dryer, a symbol, a extension of the floor, all at the same time. And it only becomes one or the other when we consciously measure it as such. So, of course, it's not objectively a dryer. It's not even a dryer at all, or it doesn't have to be a dryer at all. It is not true that it is objectively a dryer, because it could be a symbol too. And the reason why it's not true is because objectivity, traditionally, is conferred by rationality, right? But we, as I just explained, we just transcended rationality. So we're not being rational, we're being irrational. So it's not objectively a dryer. It can't be. I don't know what to say. So this completely undercuts every single one of your objective claims, unquestionably. So it's not even true, objectively true, for example, that Rey from Star Wars drank water during a particular scene, because quantum logic can always be employed on it, turning it to a symbol representing the life force or a relationship with her parents, right? So it's not that she drank the water, it's that she received the spiritual energies of the life force. It's got nothing to do with drinking water, or if it does have to do with drinking water, it's not just drinking water. If it's drinking water and receiving the spiritual symbolism, guess what? You've just transcended, again, laws of logic, rationality, which is the mode of thought that confers objectivity on on the objects. So no, it's not objectively true that this happened in art, and it's not even, honest to God, it's not even objectively true that this water bottle exists right here, because again, you can always employ quantum logic. Now, don't be an idiot. Don't be a moron. Of course, we're transcending rationality, which means we're not going backwards into this deficient irrationality. So when you're in a car driving a highway, and you see another car coming, you could, in theory, just view it as a symbol and nothing more, right? You could. And then if you're a physical car and that's just just some empty 2D symbol, well, if you make physical contact with it, you're going to win every time. Obviously, if you do that in real life, you're going to be killed. So it's not about regressing into irrationality, it's about transcending into irrationality. And irrationality makes it clear that the object in question belongs to a preceding field of ontological simultaneity in which it exists as all of these things or none until we consciously measure it. Beautiful. So quantum logic is what makes symbolism possible at all, something that I rarely ever hear you guys ever talk about, unless it's the most basic bitch symbolism out there, like Star Wars and shit. I mean, nothing wrong with that. I love Star Wars. I agree with you guys completely that 7, 8, 9 are absolute terrible. The difference is I don't claim that anyone who disagrees with me is objectively wrong. I'm just speaking from my own subjective opinion. You can disagree with me. You have more than that right to disagree with me. You're a completely different person. You have completely different experiences. Time sort of sings through you differently, if you will. Now, to be clear, we have to integrate the world we live in. Most people in America are, or at least in the West, are rationalists. So I don't necessarily blame you. I don't think you're dumb for interpreting things the way you do, because that's how I used to interpret it before I read Jean Gebser. I got lucky that I found Jean Gebser. Nonetheless, when one receives facts that warrant a change of mind, the mature adult changes their mind, and I've received said facts. So, in the end, it destroys your claim of objectivity, because all logic relies on quantum logic, and quantum logic inherently destroys this objectivity. I apologize if I'm being a little repetitive, but again, with these rationalist guys, you cannot leave a single stone unturned. They will always go after you. There's another problem, too. So the division and separation of objective and subjective is classic rational thought. But rational thought is only possible when one imposes space between themselves and the object of reflection. And of course, in this case, it would be the movie. The problem is when one watches a film, they're usually so submerged in the story and images that the possibility for this is precluded. So usually, movies kind of activate your pre-rational and irrational faculties, right? Because your pre-rational faculties are activated in the form of this sort of intense submersion or focus into the film, and then the mythical structure is activated because you're assigning all this narrative, all this significance, all this meaning to the story, and the story itself is essentially a small-scale myth put into film. Rationality can be good, but it's not everything. The point is, when you rationally consider something, you have to impose space between you and the object to do it. It's very difficult to rationally and philosophically, on a high level, consider or analyze the soccer game while you're playing the game, right? Because then you have to defend, and you have to score, and you have to stay focused. Here's another thing. I should have mentioned this in the very beginning. To be clear, art is both a spiritual utterance as well as an expression, in essence, of the pre-rational and the irrational. I think I'll probably expand on this later. Taking a purely rational, honest to God, I bet if I asked the EFAP guys, hey, do you guys think this movie is a purely rational thing? They're going to say no, because they're not idiots, right? So if it's not purely rational, I would assume you would concede that it's pre-rational and irrational. So if it's pre-rational, irrational, as well as rational, because the pre-rational and the irrational acts as the sort of fuel for art, and the rational comes in as an ordering agent, right? You can consciously order these things and connect them. It's a beautiful little mix there. But nonetheless, the pre-rational and irrational make up a bulk of the work. So if you do concede that art is not this purely rational phenomena, and if you do concede that the pre-rational and irrational constitute it, why in the world are you taking a strictly rational approach to art? It doesn't make sense. Maybe I'll expand on that later. So when people are watching the movie, there is a certain degree of, yes, you can analyze things to a certain extent. You are imposing a little bit of space, but it's not so much, it's not like what these guys are doing, because they're really imposing space so they can think about it abstractly, but they're not really doing that. When people experience the film, the objective aspects and the subjective aspects are experienced together. They are co-present in the experience. The film itself is an integral whole. So if this objective and subjective are co-present, then I think what we've done is we've collapsed the space and we've conjoined them. So it's not entirely true, as they always repeat, that objectivity and subjectivity are separate. No, they become separate when you frame them as separate, and you can only frame them as separate after you give it the rational treatment, right? But if you do that, as I've just said, you've completely precluded the possibility to engage with art on its own terms, not only in terms of the pre-rational and the irrational, but also its spiritual, the fact that it is a spiritual utterance. There you go. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but drop this idea that you guys are in the sole possession of the objective truth and that anyone who disagrees with you is objectively wrong. You are the wrong one. You're the rationalist who's stuck in a non-deficient projection. We're the ones who transcended you. So, and we also understand art on its own terms. So the reason why the whole is perceived as such is because it's not just what happens in the film, which is spatial movement, spatial matters, but the time factor too. So that the scenes unfold according to their particular temporal unfolding or sequencing is exactly what allows the integral whole to be perceived, right? So first this happens, then this, then this. First, Spider-Man receives news that Mary Jane is captured. Then this happens, which is to say then he gets angry. Then this happens, which is to say he puts on his suit and he fights the crime. He tries to save MJ. Now, it might sound obvious when I'm saying it, it is, but we're going to expand on this later. We'll return to this, but I don't think you guys quite understand what you've touched on. You've touched on space-time. What you've touched on is that the temporal unfolding, or sequencing of the spatial movements, that is to say what happens in the film, is exactly what gives order and meaning to the film, which allows the film to be perceived as an integral whole. It's beautiful. So you can say, this scene makes sense because it follows a scene that was played in the first act or 50 minutes ago. In fairness, again, I understand that the EFAP guys understand this to an extent. I think you guys understand on a surface level. And I don't say that to be rude, but I don't think you've properly integrated time as a dimension, as space-time, as an invisible dimensional backdrop that opens up space and allows it to unfold, assigning an order and meaning in the process. So again, we will return to this. So objectivity's done. Quantum logic destroys it. That's number one. Two, the way a movie is experienced, it's when the objectivity and subjectivity are co-present, so that's gone too. I don't know what to say. So what makes something good? So good and bad are very clearly subjective qualitative valuations that derive from a quantifiably immeasurable internal source. I know this is difficult for rationalists to come to terms with. I don't care. You are wrong. It comes, us Gibbsarians, we know it comes from the mythical structure, which is infused with immeasurability and irrationality that rationality simply cannot account for and cannot come to terms with, let alone appreciate. But the EFAP boys disagree. Good and bad result from narrative coherence or structural consistency. And if you guys say no, that's only sometimes it results from narrative coherence and structural consistency, and other times it doesn't. Again, see the point I just made about time, my friend. We'll explore that. So, as rationalists, we can clearly see the overemphasis of space. Film is good when its script is arrayed spatially in a consistent way. So, pretty simple. Remove the time. You can't really remove the time element. So when things are orderly, when the script is ordered and it makes sense and the character arcs make sense and things are consistent and characters are consistent, this is what makes it good. That is to say, when the components of the film, whether it be the script, whether it be the characters, the ideas, are arrayed and conceived spatially in a way that is conducive to rational thought. Nonetheless, you can watch a perfectly consistent, technically flawless work while feeling hollow as you experience it, just like I did when I watched the movie Following, directed by Christopher Nolan. It was a beautiful film. Acting was great. The composition was excellent. The black and white was great. I just said that. Directing was awesome. All of it was great. Unfortunately, I didn't feel a goddamn thing. Okay? So time as intensity, time as experience, wasn't intense at all when it should have been intense, because that's what movies do. They're supposed to evoke, but it did not evoke. So the reason why is obvious. Art, in essence, as I said earlier, is an expression of the pre-rational and irrational, where the rational comes in as an ordering agent. Structure and consistency belong to rationality and the mental structure, and thus cannot properly, on its own, feed the essence of art. So the reason why something that is rationally, spatially, and conceptually flawless and technically perfect, the reason why it could still be considered a bad piece of art is because you're not integrating the pre-rational and irrational aspects that go into the creation of this piece and how it feels when you're actually watching it, the time as intensity that is experienced as you watch it. So yeah, good and bad are qualitative evaluations. So even when you watch their videos and you hear them describe a film as good, you can always ask, but why is this good? Until eventually they will have to concede that it's subjective. So when they say, this set up and that paid off, all I have to do is ask you, well, what makes that good? And then they're going to say, well, it's set up and paid off. Yeah, but what about that makes it good? Well, it's in alignment with the story, consistent. Okay, but why does that make good, right? You can keep going until eventually, sure enough, and I promise you they're going to, well, they seem like somewhat mature guys, but usually when you do this, the rationalists, they start to get super indignant. It's very annoying. Eventually, they, through tears, will concede that, yes, it is a subjective valuation at the end of the day. It is not objectively good. I don't know what to say. It's just absurd. It's let's see. Even sometimes, like, and the funny thing is, like with a lot of rationalists, a lot of it's lip service, because they might concede that, well, yeah, even if sometimes it sets up and pays off, it's still not good. Okay, well, it sounds like you're admitting the subjective principle as well as the pre-rational and irrational. And if that's the case, why does that never show up in your analysis? Why is it that you never actually really talk about it that much? Why is it you only talk about the rational? I guess my point is, even they, while claiming that something is good objectively because it's set up and payoff, will also concede at other times that it's not objectively good because it's set up and payoff. There's this a very weird contradiction happening here that I think reveals that even they know that there is no objective good, because there are times when the objectively good thing is still bad and times when the objectively bad thing is still good. So I don't know what to say. All good and bad are qualitative evaluations. The subjectivity and objectivity are not necessarily separate. Okay. Next up, time as an intensity. This is at the big problem. Time is missing from your guys' analysis, and it's not in the literal sense, because you guys do say things like, well, first this happens, then this happens. This only works because this followed it, this preceded it. Yes, but I don't think you guys quite understand what you've touched upon. There's no respect for time as an intensity. And time as an intensity is usually very active when engaging with art, even bad art, because then you're feeling the intensity of boredom. The quality of boredom is charging the present or the moments that you spend watching the film. So, of course, let's say you're watching a good movie, right? All these active... Let's say you're watching a great movie, and as you're watching it, all of these internal potencies, latencies are activated and connected to the film. So it evokes things like joy, pleasure, appreciation. You're having a great time, essentially. It's not necessarily that, let's say the film is 2 hours. It's not that the 2 hours spent is just this neutral, empty container. It is experience. It is lived. So the moments you lose your wallet, right, those moments of fear are experienced. They're not some empty thing that you subjectively just kind of go, oh, yeah, that was bad. No, you experience that fear. Well, the same thing with movies, right? So in suspense, you feel that suspense. You feel the joy. You feel the appreciation. And same thing if you're watching a bad movie, right? You will activate negative qualities like boredom, frustration, annoyance, and regret. The problem with the EFAP boys is they take an incredibly cold, I would argue shallow, taking to this concept. I very, very rarely hear them talk about time as an intensity. They might mention it here and there. They might say, this made me feel tense. This made me feel bored. That's it's in a measurable sense, yes, you are mentioning, but in terms of quality, you're not really getting into like what that means. How does that affect you? How did that affect your thoughts, your memories? Instead, they choose to take this emotionally detached, objective, and distant perspective, but what's the point of that? How can art touch, let alone transform, the soul from that perspective, from this emotionally detached, cold, measured, causal perspective? Art, in my opinion, I think to reduce it to a singular function is a degradation in accordance with its spiritual nature. Nonetheless, if you were going to force me to choose one and put a gun to my head, I would say art is of and for the soul. And of course, the soul is immeasurable. It is irrational. I want to make that very clear. And rationality simply cannot understand it. It can kind of help it. It can order it somewhat, but it's not going to do it. Why you would ever engage with art in such a shallow and cold and distant way when it is of and for the soul. Soul requires intimate connection. It requires emotion. It requires all of our human aspects, all the things that make us human, not just the laws of logic, but those other things. It's just I don't know. It just seems silly. But there's a sort of feedback loop that happens when you receive, as time unfolds and the picture unfolds and new scenes unfold. So if you're watching a good movie, the positive qualities can be integrated with the rest of your internal constitution, meaning memories and romantic images can be evoked, right? So if I'm watching a movie and I'm having a great time and I get to a scene that I really like and I realize, oh, you know what, that's just so weird, it's so random, but this scene reminded me of that time when I was 10 and I was with my cousin and I hurt my leg and she picked me up and she carried me, and it was such a kind thing that it totally reminds me of what Spider-Man did in that. And man, for the fact that this movie can do that, I mean, it totally just reminded me of love, and I can feel that love in the moment, and I can feel connection to life, all because of this one little scene, all because of this one little line, this one little moment. And then maybe I watch another line, and that reminds me of a line I heard in one of my favorite songs, and that in turn reminds me to think, well, what music would be really great in this movie? And that makes me think, well, let me think of the qualities charging the movie or the moment. This is a time as an intensity, time as a quality. This is a time of seriousness, of intimacy, of calmness. So maybe I'll play, I don't know, Candy Says by the Velvet Underground, something very quiet, something very soft. Or maybe this part in the film is when there's a lot of action happening, and I'm going to play Metallica or something like that. And that reminds me of this really romantic image. It's art, people. You are allowed to be pre-rational and irrational. You are allowed to be romantic. It is art. This is what makes life meaningful, connecting intensely powerful moments of the present to those of the past, or maybe even the future, and realizing that a silly movie about space wizards can actually act as a great reminder of love and beauty. It is a beautiful thing, and you can never, ever, ever get this if all you're talking about is purely space and not time as an intensity, not the actual time experience watching the film and the evocation of internal processes and latencies and how they connect to the film. If you're only saying, yeah, I felt tense when that happened, like more or less, that's really as deep as you go. There might be a more eloquent variation. Nonetheless, I don't know what to say. You're not going to get anything meaningful in life from this just shallow, mechanical, causal analysis of art. It's just silly. Meaning comes from recognizing the qualities that charge the present moment, recognizing that they arise from a preceding integration between the film and your internal constitution, and investigating why that is. So the EFAP boys think they're doing this, but they're really not. They're doing it in the most shallow way. They think they're doing it, but they've taken art, which is constituted by all this immeasurable stuff. They're reducing it to the measurable and the known, and then they're just sticking with that. But the problem is, in doing that, you reduce that which can be reduced, and that which can be reduced, in this case, is incredibly shallow. Okay, so let's do time as a procedural unfolding. Now, this one is less of a criticism, because I know you guys, they're smart guys, and they understand this, but I don't think they quite understand the implications of it. So time as a procedural unfolding. So order is conferred, based on the temporal sequencing and unfolding of the spatial object in question. So, for example, you listening to my words right now, you are not receiving... let's say my sentence right now contains 15 words. You're not receiving all 15 words at once, because to do so, you would never be able to assign any sort of order from this. You hear my words. First, it's this word, then that, then this. It's this very even, continuous, uninterrupted duration. And the reason why I speak this way is because it helps confer order onto you. If I were to try to teach you something, and I were to speak... in a speed or a frequency of movement, which is, say, time, more similar to slam poetry, well, that would be a little more confusing, because everything's all over the place. Words are coming out too quickly. Words are being too loud. Important words are not being loud enough. They're taking way too long for you to say. It doesn't help confer order. So very obvious. I mean, this is a pretty obvious thing, but there's a profound implication here. So kind of like what I was saying earlier with the Spider-Man. First he receives the news, then he gets angry, then he does, then he goes and fights crime. So I guess if you want to call it criticism, well, actually, let's take it back. First of all, we can see how time itself, the temporal unfolding of the spatial object, conditions and affects that object itself. So let's say we're chemists and we're cooking up something. So I have my little potion here, right? Let's say we're in Hogwarts. So I have my potion. First, emphasis on the temporal. First, I add element A. Then, emphasis on the temporal, I add element B. Finally, emphasis on the temporal, I add element C. Now, of course, element A, B, and C are space. So we have first, time, element A, space, and then you keep going. Okay, so at the end, what I get is blue meth, a la Breaking Bad. Let's say I'm cooking up meth. Forget Hogwarts. So I want to cook up meth. I do first A, then B, then C, then I get my blue meth. Amazing. Let's say I want to do it a different way. So first, we do A, element A. Then, instead of element B, we're going to do element C. We're going to add element C second. And finally, temporal, we add element B. Instead of blue meth, I get an explosion that kills my boy Jesse Pinkman. Why? Because you did not follow the right temporal process. As we can see, the temporal unfolding or sequencing of spatial movements affects the end result of that spatial movement, if you want to call it that. The reason why the first attempt ended in success, and the reason why the second attempt did not end in success but backfired, is because you messed up the temporal sequencing. So we can very clearly see how space is directly connected to time. And time, as I mentioned earlier, is this invisible dimensional backdrop that creates space, because everything that happens in space either comes into being in a moment or according to some temporal unfolding, and then confers order and meaning on it by its order, right? First, then this, then this. So take that principle and apply it to art. Now, again, they kind of understand this because, when they critique, and I would agree with them on this, the new Star Wars movies, and they say, it's really annoying that Palpatine returned at the very end of the 9th movie after he already went on essentially his 6th journey arc, and it was a complete bookend. We had beginning, middle, end, and it ended in a state of finality. That Palpatine returns is only made meaningful and only evokes anger based on its temporal sequencing or unfolding, which is to say, after all this other stuff happened. If you didn't know who Palpatine was and he didn't have a story, you would be less upset with Palpatine's reintroduction into the film. So I think, again, it's less a critique, but I think if you take this principle and you work with it, it'll raise the insightfulness. Excuse me, that probably wasn't the best way of phrasing it. It will raise the insight that you are able to kind of recognize and transmit to your followers, to your fans, because you recognize, space is directly dependent on time, and if you mess with the time, it affects. I gotcha. And then, of course, I think that'll probably be it. So that's my critique of EFAP. Again, it's completely ridiculous with this objectivity in art. It's just bullshit. It's further bullshit that objective and subjective are necessarily separate. That is a projection, my friend. We've known that since Einstein. I would argue you can never have a fully objective or fully subjective experience, and the co-presence of both means that, no, they're not separate. So that's number one. That's number two. And then, of course, time. You guys have to integrate time into your analysis, whether it be time as an intensity, whether it be time as a sort of procedural unfolding, and the importance of that and how that confers order and meaning onto the spatial actions, and time as a quality, too. So I love you guys. I will see you guys soon, and thank you for continuing to watch. Love you.